take it in your grave, it'll go to the afterlife. But he also realized that the Lord God knows the color of money. So he says, this money I can't take with me, I'll not be allowed to enter into heaven. So he decides, what should I do? So he calls the three most ethical men in his life to him. His priest, his doctor, and his lawyer. And gives them $20,000 cash and says, please, when I die, put them in an envelope and put it in my grave. Because he knows that those are ethical men. If it comes from them, that will be clean money, and God will open the doors of heaven for me, and I'll have the wealth also. So true to what was expected, he dies. When his coffin is laid in, these three gentlemen quietly put in that envelope. And when they're walking out, the priest says, my heart is heavy. I put in only $15,000 in that. $5,000 I sent for charity in Africa, for a missionary. The doctor said, oh, since you said this, you've taken a great thing off my head. I've actually put in only $10,000. I've sent 10,000 to Red Cross. So the lawyer said, shame on you guys. You took away money. He said, but we saw your envelope. It was the thinnest of the envelope. How have you put in all the money? He says, no. I put in a check for the full amount of $20,000 there. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the world of money laundering. In a gathering of lawyers who are credited with creating the entire world of money laundering. Let me also put it in perspective for ease of understanding of what I might be saying. A Chief Justice had actually put in very elaboratively what money laundering is. But let me explain it. There's always a saying, if you can't explain it easily, then you will be lost later on. So all of us have at some point of time seen jugglers, whether in a magician's show or in a circus. And one of the games that they play or ask you to play is, they'll have 3 cups or glasses which they'll invert. And in that they'll have 2 white balls and 1 red ball. It could be anything else. And they'll quickly move it from one to the other. And then ask you to guess which one has the red ball. More often than not, statistics show that you will guess the wrong one. Now, that is essentially what money laundering is. You do not know under which umbrella or which cup is the thing that you're looking for. So what anti-money laundering tries and does is asks you to take away the cup and not guess what it is and find out what it is. So what it is essentially is conversion. What it is exactly what money laundering literally means. That's where the term originates, from the laundromats. So back in the 20s with the prohibition law in the US and Al Capone, the most famous of the underworld dons, they started, the money that they were generating from bootlegging and illegal liquor was being converted to legit money through laundromats that were being operated. When the officials asked where the money is coming in from, a lot of people are getting their laundry done. That's where the money laundering comes, and it's literally cleaning of bad money into a clean money. In fact, they could very well use the tagline of Surf Excel. दाग भी अच्छे हैं और 10 रुपए में दाग धुलते हैं. That's exactly what the money laundering does. It takes away the taint of criminality from the money and puts on a platter as absolutely legal tender. But of course, it doesn't originate, unlike what we claim, most things originating from India or Europe. This one actually originates from China, 3,000 years ago. That is when they were using all the 3 layers, as we were explained earlier in the morning. So all the illegal activity, the cash that was being generated, and then it was different format of value that was being stored, the first thing that would do is convert them into very plausible, movable assets. And then the second layer is having that cash smuggled out to different jurisdictions or outside of your country or outside of your state. And the third is trade those movable assets at an inflated price and get the money back as a very legitimate earning. And that's on first principles, that's still very much what money laundering is. But also before I move on to the legislative imports, let's also see the philosophy behind anti-money laundering, which is exactly you want to stop money laundering and its genesis. Normally, if you see traditionally, criminal punishments follow crimes and civil punishments follow civil disputes or damages in that format. And then so what does anti-money laundering law does? It actually forfeits and confiscates the asset that has been created or the money that has been created through illegality or illegal action. So then we have seen in a lot of fiscal statutes and a lot of civil statutes now where you find criminal penalties. But anti-money laundering, what it does is, it twists that principle on its head and provides for civil forfeiture for a criminal act. So what it does is, your money that is generated, and I'm speaking in a very, more like a very crude language because it's easier to explain. What it does is, any money which has been generated out of a criminal activity, that money actually is turned into an asset normally. So you forfeit that asset and deprive the man of that asset. Dehorse how you punish him criminally, because that's only the consequence. The first thing the anti-money laundering is, confiscate the civil property, and the purpose is, the traditional format of crime and punishment was punishment and prevention, but this one with anti-money laundering, with civil forfeiture, the jurisprudence now moves ahead, and what it provides is a preventive form of criminal jurisprudence. And how it does is, it essentially, once your money is confiscated or assets are confiscated, it prevents you from doing two things. One, using that illegal money as working capital for future illegal acts. Because as we have seen, even illegal acts now require a lot of investments. And to take a very easy example, if you've seen movies like Ocean's 11 or Italian Job or even Dhoom from Bollywood, they're all criminal acts. There's a lot of investment which goes in, a lot of expenses that you have to incur to actually undertake that heist. Now, if your illegally earned money is what funds that, if you confiscate that, that takes it away. So that is one. And two, which is more important if you have to see the socio-economic structure, is that it prevents those people who have gotten that wealth from flaunting it to become role models for others to follow that lifestyle. If you do not confiscate that property, you will find them living the best lives and suddenly find them becoming role models for the next generation which is coming in. See, so that is what anti-money laundering wishes to prevent. But where does it come from? It essentially came in from that the profit-making criminal acts, the criminal acts are bodily acts, you murdered someone, they're one kinds of act. There are financial crimes which are much later, which came in much later. And then there are others which are against the actions which are barred by law. Amongst all of them, the biggest money spinners, traditionally and even now, are two. Drugs, because there's where you earn money out of the illegal act. It is not just committing an offense. And second is human trafficking. So what was figured out was that the money that is earned through these two activities, eventually the earner would want them not to be hidden anymore, because it's not possible to hide so much of money, layer it and convert it into legit money. Once it is legit money, it can be used for whatever purposes. It's out in the open. That is what the genesis of money laundering is. It was essentially to curb. So if you take away their assets and profits from the whole system, the drug business or human trafficking business would no more be profitable. And that came in from the economic theory of law. That all legislations, human behavior can be explained in economic terms. So if it is profitable, so if today drug business becomes non-profitable, most of them will give it up on its own. That was the thought process, ditto for human trafficking. And that is why some of the most stringent laws across the world that have been formulated are on prevention of money laundering. But also, the other thing that, on the Indian context, where we have on that, no, that's okay. In fact, also I was saying that please remind me on time. I don't know how long I go in, and I must warn you. This is. I know. This is what happens. I've got 2 boys, and usually we have got school dressed like lawyers, and every day when you're going in, invariably one of them will say all the best because we are gladiators fighting for someone else's awards. So one of these days I was not dressed in courtroom dress, and I was heading out, and the older one says, "Where are you off to?" I said, "Today I'm going in for a lecture." So he says, "Okay then, fair enough, all the best for the lecture." Without blinking an eye, the younger one says, "Bhai, he doesn't need the best wishes today. It's the people who are going to listen to him." So I am aware of that. Children do say that, so please let me know whenever I need to finish. I'm okay with that. There are 2 more things on how to explain why money laundering is so, it's not simpliciter a money changing hands or converting from a criminal offense. I'll go into a little bit of financial jargon, pardon me for that. If you've understood or seen structured financial products, which is like the actual product is only a structure around an underlying asset. To explain it even more clearly, let me take the example of money or currency. It is in a way a structured financial product. It is a sovereign guarantee given by the one who's printed that currency note, where the underlying asset, where the value is earlier times it used to be gold because you couldn't print innumerable currency. The value came in from the gold, and in current times it is no more gold. It's the ability of the government who is printing notes to raise taxes and revenue. It's become a simple economic function. The ability to raise taxes, if you have, you can print the money accordingly, and that's why the whole inflation economy comes in. So money laundering is a structured financial process instead of a product. What it does is the underlying crime, which is drugs or human trafficking, and the money that is generated, it uses conversion and layering to then convert into legitimate money. So the value of that money is actually the underlying criminal activity. And that is why you need to curb that money laundering. So that's why anti-money laundering processes. Now, once we understand that's a structural process, I also wish to emphasize before going on to the Indian legislation that what is happening is that the whole UN cry for the last 20 years has been on financial crimes, scams, etc. The fundamental difference which we need to understand when we are talking of money laundering is the difference between financial crimes and criminal finance. They're 2 completely different things. Money laundering is a function of criminal finance. So let me explain. A financial crime is something you cheated your friend out of his property. That's a financial crime. You've done insider trading on the stock exchange. That's a financial crime. You violated the SEBI norms and earned some money out of it. That's a financial crime. But what is criminal finance? Criminal finance is the act of funding, investing, reaping profits, and redistributing that profit in a criminal activity. So if I lend money to a drug lord for him to undertake the business of drug trafficking, that's criminal finance. So what the money laundering laws, and that is why they're so stringent across the world, is essentially to curb criminal finance. But unfortunately, India has gone on the path for addressing the issue of Money Laundering Act on financial crimes. And why that is a problem in India? When we see the Indian context, as Justice Ahluwalia had very nicely put it, that you cannot take away the human element and reality. And I'm also reminded of Lord Denning when he said that justice is blindfolded. It's blind, but it's blind towards prejudices, not reality. So we have to see reality of Indian context. And I'm again reminded of last week, Gurcharan Das, the eminent author, had published an article with data on educational institutions, principally schools. And he pointed out that any school to open in India, depending on which state it opens up, needs 30 to 50 permissions. And a school to run, depending on which state you are in, you need almost up to 70 documents to be kept ready in forms of registers or documents for inspection at any point of time. I don't need to say what it leads to. It leads to a lot of cash being exchanged. Now, if that cash is exchanged, it's automatically illegal money. I'm not talking about, that's why I want to differentiate between illegal money, which is illegal money. It's taxable, it's corruption, etc. But the underlying business is legitimate. That's education. Whether it's business or activity, I'm only speaking in terms of business because it's money. So therefore, do we want money laundering to be applied for issues where the underlying business is legitimate? When we focus on that, we lose track of the aspects where the underlying business itself is crime, which is mostly drug money and human trafficking. If we see the international conventions, the three broad ones, the Vienna and Palermo, and thereafter the FATF, they've also mostly talked about drug money and human trafficking. But in India, what has happened in 2002, when the Act first came in, the scheduled offences stuck through their the correct true form, and they were mostly on drug-related, narcotics-related, human trafficking-related, with a few additional ones. But with the amendments in 2009 and 13, which were mostly because of pressures of these scams which India was seeing. Now, with that pressure, what happens is when your existing legislations are not being able to execute, it's very easy to blame it on the inadequacy of the legislation and bring in a newer, more complex legislation, overlapping it doesn't lead us anywhere. So for example, anti-money laundering provisions in NDPS was very much there for drug money. And in fact, when Supreme Court, while striking down the bail provisions in the PMLA Act, mentioned that the NDPS Act bail provisions have got a reasonable classification, so therefore they are good. This one doesn't have, so struck down. So law which was to bring in for inadequacy of NDPS Act, we've actually figured out that it's poorer in form. And why to act when it was there? For the corruption aspect, which is now in 2009 and 13, if you see the scheduled offences list, it also takes into its account things like cheating 420. Now, therein what happens is it eventually leads to only political persecution and not really its true purpose of finding out or dismantling drugs and human trafficking. And that's very seen from statistics. If you Google top 5 money laundering cases in the world, vis-a-vis you Google top 5 money laundering cases in India. I've got a list, of course it's an arguable list, but it's Google throws up things. The top 5 money laundering cases in the world which come in, and mostly through the banking channels when the money was laundered, 4 of them directly linked to drug trafficking and 1 of them to Russian mafia. Now vis-a-vis see the top 5 cases which are listed under Indian, and there have not been convictions under this act in India, but the top 5 cases where these provisions could apply. 2G scam, coal scam, security scam, and the 4th one, I had a list, I'm just forgetting. So here you're only addressing financial crimes. This is not the purpose of going into, and in no case so far, on drug-related or human trafficking under PMLA Act in India. Not that comes up on search. They might have initiated now, but none which comes up on search. So it's like saying that you were brought in the army to kill the rat. So you want to use the PMLA Act to address issues like cheating. Yes, financial, for Prevention of Corruption Act. A lot of hue and cry, but their existing laws exist. If the existing laws exist, then either you strengthen them if they're inadequate, or scrap them if they're completely different ones you need, but overlapping will always be a problem. The misplaced emphasis has also had its problem. Now the international community has been now so strong on money laundering, but at the same time, no country is willing to scrap tax havens. Whether it's US, it's Europe, it's India or China. Nobody is willing to do that. The entire money laundering as we now know it normally is channeled through the tax havens. The international conventions talk of curbing money laundering, but they don't end up sort of barring tax havens because it's good for them, they don't want to do that. The layering also is more a function, how do you figure that out, is of forensics. Just to have forensics in criminal law is a financial forensic team. It's a very expertise subject. Now, if those expert people, you're going to spend their energy on financial crimes, I think there'll be no energy left with them to actually deal with criminal finance. So those were some of the few pointers that I wanted to open up. The details on the law, I think we can join in later. Thank you so much. It's been